Hi, I'm Lori Elliott-Bartle, and I'm a painter at Hot Shops Art Center in studio number 210. I use oil paints and often mix the paints with a medium called cold wax, and that's just beeswax that has some solvent and resin included. It gives the paint a lot of body and allows me to achieve texture really easily, and that's something that I really enjoy working with. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. I'm working on a few pieces, paintings on paper. It's a special paper called Arches oil paper, which is ready to paint without any particular preparation on the surface or anything. So I'm just going to mix some paint and mix it with the wax. Part of what makes this process fun is that it's very versatile and very forgiving. I usually mix to start with, about half paint to wax. The wax comes in a can like this and is about the consistency of Crisco vegetable shortening. So it makes the paint more matte, takes away some of that gloss, and I get to use tools from all over the place, not just traditional painting tools, but I use a lot of palette knives. This is actually a bowl scraper, a kitchen bowl scraper that has a stainless steel interior. And it's great for applying wide swaths of color, covering a broad area. Using these materials has loosened up my style a little bit. I have been painting for quite a while, and still occasionally do paint in a more realistic manner. But using these sorts of broad tools and building up layers and cutting back into them allows me to explore things a little more abstractly, which is a lot of fun. One of the things that's really nice about painting this way is that it's very forgiving. So I'm really not that crazy about this layer of color, so I can just scrape it back down. I tend to use a lot of materials like textured papers or screens, strips of kind of a burlappy sort of material. Let's see. I also use tools that are traditionally used for printmaking, like a brayer. You can use this to apply color and also to get some texture. So normally what I would do is just continue kind of layering things up and adding different colors. I often will let things dry for a little bit before I start messing with it again, because the wet and wet, you can only do so much when everything's all wet at the same time. I often don't have a particular plan for any one painting. Tend to work pretty intuitively, just building up layers and textures and then scraping back down and seeing what happens. Although at certain points I do make a lot of paintings that are inspired by prairie landscapes. One of the things I really enjoy doing is building up some layers and then cutting back down through the upper surface to get to those base layers. I tend to do things that have quite a bit of contrast. And these shapes that evoke the idea of prairie grasses, that's a texture and line quality that I return to often. As you can tell, I'm not one of those painters that lays out a beautifully organized palette before I get started. I typically mix colors as I go. When I do workshops, I have the participants just use skewers like this, just that you can buy at the grocery store, to make your kebabs or whatever, because they have a sharp end for fine lines, and you can also use the blunt end for thicker lines. But when I'm working on my own, I use this is actually a ceramics tool that has a couple of ball points, different sizes, and I like using this for incising into the surface, again revealing those underlying layers. And oftentimes, many of these lines will disappear with the addition of more layers, but some of them show through. They kind of become some of the history of the painting. And I often am thinking about maps when I'm doing that kind of line work. So I'll let these dry usually for a day, and then I can come back to them tomorrow and add more layering and textures. I get ideas all over the place through travel, but also just daily life. When I see plants and animals when I'm out riding my bike. I take a lot of photographs. I like to use my own photographs as reference materials. And so even this painting, for example, came from photographs I took when I was visiting the Kearney area during the migration of the sandhill cranes a few springs ago. And this is a painting that actually I had a plan for when I started it, which is not always how I work, but in this case it was very intentional. I get ideas from listening to music, from reading poetry, from reading literature generally, and just dreaming, I guess. Especially the paintings that are more intuitive, the ideas emerge as I'm working on the piece. So that comes some with experience and practice. It's very satisfying to work on something and achieve what I see in my mind's eye. That doesn't always happen. And sometimes there are surprises that can be equally satisfying. But when I have an idea and am able to execute it in a way that matches what I've seen, what I've imagined, that's very satisfying. I also find a great deal of satisfaction and take pride in collaborating with other artists. And the collaboration that I've done with Marcia Jaffe-Boschke and Tom Quest, which began several years ago and has continued to be a source of inspiration and very real pride. They're great to work with, and we think we've made some interesting artwork out of that collaboration, exchange of ideas and sharing interests and inspirations, and we inspire each other and learn from each other, and I find that to be a continued source of inspiration and pride both. When the building is open, my studio door is often open, and I welcome people to come in and wander and look around and ask questions. I think one of the great things about Hot Shops Art Center is that people can see the process of creation and ask questions and get a sense of what goes into making any particular piece of artwork. And so I welcome people to come visit and wander and wonder and ask questions.